Om Jnanatimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapad Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratashe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, let me just let a few others in. Okay, so, and again, sorry for last week. My health was just very not good, so I had to cancel last second. Because we did miss out on last week, does anyone want to fill us in on what we got up to last week? A fortnight ago. At what point are we up to now? I'll give you a hint. It's not the 7th chapter.
I think we were looking at the questions that Arjuna asked Krishna at the start of the 8th chapter, and the 8 questions that he asked and the 8 answers, which Krishna gives in 4 and 5 of that chapter, and then remembering Krishna at the time of death.
Yeah, that's a pretty good summary, because we were discussing, we got up to 8:15. Yeah, we did get up to 8:15, I think, as well. So if we both remember that, it must be at least in that ballpark. But yeah, no, content-wise, we were discussing the nature, well, what is the name of the chapter? Attaining the absolute, right? Attaining the supreme. And so the question that naturally comes is, Arjuna is firstly establishing what the nature of all of these terms that Krishna is using, but then furthermore, he's trying to get an understanding of how one can attain that supreme knowledge, right? So what's the final question that Arjuna asked in his questions? How can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? And so we were discussing the mechanisms, right, of leaving one's body and attaining the spiritual abode. Yep. And who can tell me, what is the main point we were emphasizing? We were emphasizing regarding remembering Krishna at the time of death. Can anyone tell me, what were we? Because I was discussing how often people will think I can do whatever I want, and then as long as you know, it doesn't matter how many cigarettes I've smoked, how many chickens I've eaten, it doesn't matter, right? How many temporary wives I've had, right? It doesn't matter, because at the time of death I can just think about Govinda, and then all will be well. Yes.
To practice Krishna consciousness.
One must practice Krishna consciousness in order to do what? Because Krishna's explanation is very scientific. He's explaining why this approach, it's not just that it's not fair, I have to chant my 16 rounds, so you have to too. It's not that, there's a science to it. Do we remember what is the logic behind why one must chant and practice Krishna consciousness before passing away? Do you remember?
Is it that at the time of death you remember like whatever you're most attached to, what you've been remembering, like or practicing most of your life? And so if you've been chanting your rounds and like remembering Krishna throughout and practicing Krishna consciousness, then you'll be able to remember Krishna at the time of death as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it, right? So when we die, we remember what we have practiced. When you're dying, your attention isn't really put on anything else. It is a difficult process. It is a painful process. It's something, well, you can say all of human civilization is built around avoiding it, right? We're not very keen on dying, and for good reason. It isn't a fun experience, at least insofar as I know. I don't think many of us can remember our past lives. But because of that, you're going to struggle. And therefore, what does Krishna say? I'll start sharing the screen. What does Krishna say? It was actually text 9 Mrugank. I don't know why I also thought 15. But Krishna, he says, always think of me, and in the same time carrying out your prescribed duty of fighting. Why? Why do this while fighting? Because fighting itself is difficult to do while thinking of Krishna, but it isn't as difficult as dying, right? So Krishna here, he is emphasizing this. When you learn to do all your action absorbed in Krishna, then quite naturally, you'll be able to remember Krishna at the time of death. Otherwise, you won't be able to. Otherwise, you'll remember all sorts of other things. Okay? So only if one is able to consistently be absorbed in meditation of Krishna can one succeed. And we'll discuss this more in Nectar of Devotion. Nectar of Devotion hints towards this, and then we can discuss things like Raganuga Bhakti and all those sort of things which emphasize this more. But the general principle, at least, we should imbibe here. And as I said before, what does Arjuna say? You should always think of me in the form of Krishna, right? What does this mean? What does this entail? This entails not just, oh, I am doing service to Krishna, therefore I'm remembering Krishna. Oh, I am sweeping the floor, therefore I am remembering Krishna. Doing service is very nice. Doing service is very elevated, but we must always be growing deeper and deeper in our direct absorption of Krishna. Did I tell you all the pastime of His Holiness Gaur Govinda Maharaj? He would ask his disciples. I'll say it anyways. He would tell his disciples, he would say, how often are you meditating on Krishna? These are his brahmachari disciples, right? And so they would say, Gurudev, you know, we're brahmacharis. All we do is serving Krishna. We're always meditating on him, right? And Gaur Govinda Maharaj, he said, but how often? How often are you directly appreciating the form of Krishna? How often are you thinking how beautiful is his flute? How often are you thinking how wonderful is his dancing? How often are you thinking how amazing are his pastimes and Mother Jashoda is able to bind him? How often are you meditating on the Supreme Lord like this? How often are you wondering how beautiful can this little cowherd boy be? How often are you thinking these things? And they said, oh, Guru Maharaj, maybe half an hour a day. Most, you know, when I'm having darshan, maybe sometimes in Bhagavatam class. And then Gaur Govinda Maharaj, he was saying, you must go deeper into your Krishna consciousness, right? So on the one hand, Krishna consciousness is very simple. Just do your seva and you're conscious of Krishna. But on the other hand, we are doing our seva, but we must be going deeper and deeper into our remembrance of Krishna. And that remembrance, again, will come very naturally, as is something we will discuss as we keep on going. Okay, so those were the general points that we had discussed. Now let's keep going. So we just about began discussing the Yoga Mishra Bhakta. Who can tell me? Because you need to be very familiar with this vocabulary, if you will. This is like the yoga ladder. It's a lot of Sanskrit, but you have to be familiar with this sort of language. What is Mishra Bhakti? Karma Mishra Bhakti or Jnana Mishra Bhakti? Either one. Who can tell me? What is it? Naran Prabhu, what is Karma Mishra Bhakti?
Prabhu, Karma Mishra Bhakti is where you are actually doing kind of a service for Krishna, where you're actually being actively doing, engaging. And to distinguish from the Jnana Mishra Bhakti would be to sort of Karma Mishra Bhakti would be more like a, how do I say, like, you're doing a service like without dealing like too much into the intricacies of it, like you're directly sort of connecting through your karma, like kind of doing a seva, or
so you're getting there, but it's not fully there.
Yeah.
Who can help Prabhu flesh out karma mishra bhakti?
Is it having material desires and also doing bhakti?
So that's how it's distinguished as compared to nishkama karma yoga. Nishkama karma yoga or something. One is doing one's karma, but they are doing so in a detached way, right? Karma mishra bhakti is one is doing bhakti in an attached way, right? One is doing bhakti, but they still have that desire for these karmic fruits. And karma mishra bhakti is much, much higher than anything else on the yoga ladder.
So could that be sakam karma?
No, because he's not doing karma. He's doing bhakti.
Okay.
Right? So that's what affects it. It is the process that is being done. So when one is doing these things, again, let us remember back to the examples of the 4 people who come to Krishna, right? Who are the 4? Of the 4, the first 2, we have the distressed and those seeking wealth, right? These ones are having some sort of material desire. They either want their suffering to end or they quite literally want money. And so they're doing bhakti in order to achieve it. So it's not sakama karma, because sakama karma is when one does karma kanda, like sacrifices and all, not bhakti, in order to satisfy those desires. Whereas in karma mishra bhakti, one is doing bhakti in order to satisfy those desires. And that is much, much higher. All of those are very, very dear to Krishna. That's why sometimes we will, as devotees, sometimes we'll have a little giggle, that somebody is coming to the temple and they're doing some puja for their cricket team to win, or for, to get good results in their test or something. We might find that a little silly, but if it's done with at least some bhakti, this is very elevated. We can consider even those personalities to be in a very elevated position. Much, much higher than those engaged in the karma kanda. Okay, so hopefully that distinction is made clear. Then is attachment. Okay, is it attachment to the process of karma yoga or attachment to the fruits of action mixed with bhakti? I'm not sure exactly the distinction you're making there, Mrugank.
Like, I don't know what the definitions for the others are, but it's like yoga mishra bhakti would be, you still want to do yoga to advance, but you're also doing it with bhakti, like you're attached to the process of yoga, ashtanga yoga, but you also do bhakti, and so that makes it yoga mishra bhakti. But so then for karma mishra, is it that you're attached to, like you want things, but you do it via bhakti, or is it like you want to work in a detached way? But
no, so there's also an aspect, if you want those things, you're still going to do it. I don't know anyone who wants material things and also isn't, it's like it's a whole package, right? If you want those things, you're still going to do all the processes to receive those karmic benefits, but you've mixed bhakti in, and bhakti has become a significant aspect, but it's not pure, if that makes sense.
yeah, okay.
So bhakti needs to be performed, but it's always mixed, even in its execution. Like by definition, you're not purely executing bhakti, no matter which process you want, if you have any other thing, because what is bhakti defined as? It is devoid of jnana and karma altogether. So if those two propensities are there, it's not going to be purely performed anyways. So there's going to be a mixture of other process in it. Okay, so we've heard about the jnana mishra bhakta. We've heard about the karma mishra bhakta. And today we are hearing about the yoga mishra bhakta. Okay, now the yoga mishra bhakta is very interesting. And we began to discuss him a fortnight ago, or her, a fortnight ago. So in text 9, we were hearing about the various different ways that one can remember Krishna, right? These are the different aspects. And these ones, well, they apply to us as well, right? They apply to all bhaktas. But I find, at least in flavor, they're particularly pertinent to the yoga mishra bhakta. So what are they again? We recited them last week, so we'll quickly go through. Kavim, the one who knows everything. Puranam, the oldest. Anushasitaram, the controller, like this, right? All of them. Anoho aniyamsam, right? Smaller than the atom, like this. All of these different aspects we find. And so these are different aspects. If we count them up, there's 9 or 10. 9, there's 9, right? So there's these 9 different ways that one can understand or meditate upon Krishna. Then we come to the 10th text. We'll have Damini Mataji say the English after I say the Sanskrit. Prayana kale manasa chalena bhaktya yukta yoga balena chaiva bruvor madhye pranam avesha samyak satam param purusham upaiti divyam. Damini Mataji, are you AWOL? If Damini Mataji is AFK, we'll go to Bhumigita Mataji.
Yes, Prabhu. One who at the time of death fixes his life air between the eyebrows and by the strength of yoga with an undeviating mind engages himself in remembering the Supreme Lord in full devotion will certainly attain to the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Jai. So if we remember in the 6th chapter, remember we were hearing about Dhyana Yoga, right? And Dhyana Yoga was sounding like a really, really, really nice process, wasn't it? Something very engaging, something very easy to do, right? No, that hopefully wasn't our experience. If it was your experience, I tell you to go back to Satya Yuga, okay? Get out of this Kali Yuga class and go back a few kalpas, okay? It was not a very easy process, very difficult, very dry, right? Because what was this meditation, right? Focus yourself on this point in between your eyebrows and concentrate very deeply. And if you do this, then you will maybe attain some sort of perfection. But what do we find mentioned here? We're finding a perfection of even this yoga process. But instead of meditating simply on one's breath or in between one's eyes or awakening chakras or whatever is done, right? We are finding a perfection of the yoga system. And what is that? Who can tell me? How is this distinct? How is this distinct? How is this a more perfect form? Yes?
Sorry, I was trying to find out what you meant by distinct.
Yeah. How is this a more perfect form, right? How is this the completion of the yoga process, if you will?
In terms of like, are you saying this verse and how this is?
Yeah, this verse. How does this verse perfectly elaborate? And how does this verse perfectly enumerate and explain what the 6th chapter, all the chapter techniques of the 6th chapter?
Because the point of that Dhyana Yoga process, especially the Ashtanga process, which is wherein one does some regulated activity, then does some poses and then finds a seat, and then regulates, withdraws their senses and concentrates oneself into their prana to the upper channels of their body and thereby shoots themselves out of their body and obtains another planet. In this sense, what they're doing is that they're doing that for the purpose of remembering the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And therefore that the purpose of that yoga practice is actually found its root.
Exactly, Jai. So what we are finding is that this process has become complete because now it is being done for remembrance of Krishna, okay? Now it is being done to remember the Supreme Lord. So Yoga Mishra Bhakti, again, right? The Mishra Bhaktis, we don't want to be doing them, don't get me wrong, right? It's like the yoga ladder. I always get worried. We start talking about karma yoga and everyone thinks, actually, maybe this is for me, right? We don't want you to be thinking this with the Mishra Bhaktis, but they are still incredibly elevated, right? If somebody is meditating on the Supreme Lord like this, I'm just meditating on my senses all the time like this. I'm very deep in my meditation on what I'm going to have for lunch, right? If somebody is meditating on the Supreme Lord like this, very elevated personality. So again, I want to emphasize, we are discussing the Mishra Bhaktis, and we're going to discuss them in a sense where we want to do away with them. But I also want to always make that clarification. We are only saying that because we are trying to attain the highest goal. It does not mean that this is not an elevated goal, right? Somebody who has a PhD is better off than somebody who has a master's degree. It doesn't mean the person with a master's degree is somehow useless, right? It doesn't mean he's an idiot, right? Or she is an idiot, right? So, but what this is also reflecting is almost a sense of yukta vairagya. I'm not sure if we're all familiar with the concept of yukta vairagya. You definitely will be, because it's one of the memory shlokas for Nectar of Devotion. But who can tell me what yukta vairagya means?
Connected renunciation.
Yes, connected renunciation. Also, just quickly, who is Zoom user? Just for the point of marking down attendance. Just for attendance points.
Prabhu, it's us. We connected by phone.
Oh, okay.
Internet is gone.
Okay, no problem, no problem. I wasn't a inquisition or anything. I was just just so I can get the attendance down right. I don't want to mark somebody absent by accident.
Yes.
Okay, so yukta vairagya is connected renunciation, and we find this embodied in our acharyas, right? Srila Bhakti-śāstrī Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he was very much criticized. Does anyone know some of the things that he was criticized for doing? He was criticized for wearing a watch. Oh, this is not very renounced. You are a sadhu. Fun? No. Please share.
Oh, like I thought you were asking a question, so I was answering. Like
okay. Yeah.
The rocks that were thrown at him by the brahmanas.
Not just the rocks, but there was even I mean, this is not yukta vairagya example, but it's a fun pastime. Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he would do these exhibits with like these theistic exhibitions, they were called. And in one of them, he had a statue of a Brahmin, and the Brahmin was using, now I can't remember, it was one type of Shila. I forgot which Shila it is, right? But one of the Shilas that was worshipped, I can't remember, was it a Shaligram Shila? It was a Shila though. And he was using it as a nut cracker to crack open a nut to eat. And the point that Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada was making was that these days, the Brahminical order has been so corrupted that they're using the methods for worship just to feed themselves, right? And so Saraswati Thakur, Prabhupada, he got sued because back in the time you could get in trouble for causing communal disturbances, right? And so the Brahmins took him to court, and the Brahmins were taking him to court saying he is blaspheming us, he's trying to stir up the community to cause violence against the Hindu community, right? Like that, they were getting very upset, right? Trying to cancel Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada. And so, so what he said is when they went up, they said, see, he's criticizing us to cause some issues, right? He's criticizing our community. He's doing some sort of reform movement. And then Srila Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he said, that's all right. I will put Gauriya Vaishnav Tilak on the Brahmin and I'll be criticizing my own community as well. And like that, the case got dismissed. And so like that, you could see it was the Brahmin with the Gauriya Vaishnav Tilak, right? So Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, very dynamic. But actually, in a sense, that is an example of yukta vairagya, right? Because how is this renounced for a sannyasi, right? So detached from the world to be establishing theistic exhibitions, right? And forget that when he arrived in Govardhan, Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he arrived in a car, right? All the Babajis are saying, how renounced can you be? You're coming in an automobile, right? We are going barefoot. We haven't eaten in 6 years. We are doing all these austerities and you're coming in a car wearing a fancy coat with a watch, right? But this is yukta vairagya. Why? Because Srila Bhakti Vikas Maharaj, he makes this point that all of those Babajis, if you go today, they still will have air conditioning, right? Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he used all of those things, but he fully had them attached to Krishna, right? Bhakti Vikas Maharaj says, those who criticize him are more attached to the air conditioner than Srila Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada was attached to the car, to the watch, or to anything, right? Detachment and true renunciation doesn't mean that you don't have things. True renunciation means you renounce them for yourself and you attach them to Krishna. This is the definition of renunciation. And therefore, Krishna consciousness, this Krishna conscious process, is not one of denying oneself, right? It is not one of regulating oneself. It is seeing everything around us and attaching it to Krishna. Now, what does this have to do with the shloka at hand? The point that I was trying to make is that this yoga system, even for us, we can use them. But where are they made perfect? It is made perfect when it is used to meditate upon Krishna, right? In and of itself, it is not too valuable for us. Sometimes we find this among the youth. The impression sometimes, I feel like it sometimes is made, or even actually, it's not just among the youth. I encounter it more there, but it's because that impression is there among the parents, right? Then what is Krishna consciousness? It is following the 4 regulative principles, right? Isn't that right? What do we do as devotees? We are here to follow the 4 regulative principles. You are not eating meat, you are not gambling, you are not having illicit sex, and you are very, very sober. You aren't even having caffeine. Hari Bol. These days, that means you're a very elevated devotee if you're not having tea. You're at the highest levels of, of bhakti, right? If you're doing all of these things in Hare Krishna, you're not chanting, that's all right. At least you're not having caffeine, right? At least you're not having tea, right? You're not chanting Hari Bol, that's very fine, right? So sometimes we can get confused and we can think of all of these things. These are bhakti, right? And so people are very happy, right? I am a success. My child is a success. They are following all the 4 regulative principles, right? And in one sense, that is a success. The 4 regulative principles are good things. Please don't take this out of context, me mocking the 4 regulative principles or anything and get me canceled. Please don't do anything like that. But the point that's being made is the 4 regulative principles are absolutely pointless on their own. When we study the Ishopanishad, we'll find Srila Prabhupada makes this point. Garuda is such a great devotee. Who of us can say we can compete with Garuda? And does Garuda eat a nice sattvic diet? No, he's eating meat, right? So we have to take this point. These regulative principles and all of these processes of yoga and all of them are useless and only useful in their use of Krishna consciousness. These things only are useful when we use them to deepen our Krishna consciousness. Even when one gets second initiation, people make a big deal. I've gotten second initiation now. What is the point of all the Gayatri mantras? They are all chanted only so you can chant Hare Krishna better. This is the point, even of second initiation, right? All of these things are done purely and solely to deepen oneself into the meditation and remembrance of Krishna. And so, what do we find? The goal of yoga, the goal of Ashtanga yoga even, is that all of these methods can be used so that one can more deeply meditate upon Krishna. Again, we don't do these things. We are not walking the Ashtanga yoga path. If one is wondering, well, there was such a wonderful description in the 6th chapter about all of the ways to execute this Ashtanga yoga. That we'll come around to that in Nectar of Devotion. Nectar of Devotion is very nice and detailed for that for us. I'm seeing there's some chat. Bhima was fortunate to see Krishna's form, but he was smashing ksatriya meat. Exactly, right? We know for sure that Bhima was eating meat, and there's some shastric pramana, not as strong, that would imply the other Pandavas may also have been eating meat, right? So we have to keep all these things in consideration. Again, I'm not saying break the regulative principles. Please follow them. If you're not following them, please start following them. They're not bad, but they have value insofar only in that they help us in our execution of Krishna consciousness. Okay, that was the point that I was making. They do help us a lot, and therefore they do have a lot of value. But we should always remember that in of themselves, they don't have much value for us. Their value is that we have been instructed by the spiritual master to follow them, and to follow them. Why? So that we can go deeper into our Krishna consciousness. So having heard this, there's one specific aspect that Krishna he has mentioned. And what is that? That one should take in their eyebrows, wait 1 second, I'm trying to find the Sanskrit here. It's Agya Chakra or something like that. Engagement. Here we go. Bhruvo Madhye. Yeah. So in between the 2 eyebrows, right? He has situated his He has situated his life there, okay? This is the point that has been made by Krishna. And Arjuna, he sort of struggles on what this point is, right? He's sort of hearing this and he's thinking, well, we've discussed this a bit in the 6th chapter, but we didn't go into so much detail. And so with this confusion, Arjuna, now he sort of wonders, what is this process? And with that, we get texts 11 to 13. Texts 11 to 13 are just a further elaboration on this Yoga Mishra Bhakti. So we'll go quickly through them. They're not too pertinent for us, okay? Maybe we can have Vishaka Mataji can say the English after I've gone through the Sanskrit. Yadaksharam Vedavido Vadanti Vishanti Yad Yatayo Vitaragaha Yadichanto Brahma Charyam Charanti Tate Padam Sangrahena Pravakshye.
Those who are learned in the Vedas, who utter Omkara, and who are great sages in the renounced order and turn to Brahman. Desiring such perfection, one practices celibacy. I shall now briefly explain to you this process by which one may attain salvation.
Jai. So now we find Krishna, he is elaborating on this point. There, that's where I was trying to find the chakras, right? Chakra yoga. This is the name of this yoga being performed, by which again one situates the life air between the eyebrows. Okay. And we have a very interesting line here that I want to slightly touch upon, especially for the impersonalists, the akshar or omkar, right? We know, I still remember when I was little, I watched some movie on ABC3 or whatever the channel was for little kids shows, right? And there was this scene of this girl meditating. She was going through a phase it was meant to be, and she was sitting down and she was sitting, you know, in some sort of attempt at a lotus position, and she was going so clearly whoever wrote that thought that they were just sort of umming and ahhing when they meditate, but actually, as we know, it is om, right? The omkar, right? And so we find this syllable. What does Srila Prabhupada say here? Maybe Srikanta Sena Prabhu, would you like to repeat what I've highlighted?
Especially for the impersonalists, the akshara or the omkara, the syllable om, is identical with Brahman. Krishna here explains the impersonal Brahman into which the renounced order of sages enter.
So this omkar syllable is rather interesting, right? Because here we have it being described as being identical with Brahman. Now, I remember asking a question, so I'm entirely going to repeat the answer I got when I was doing Bhakti-śāstrī. I remember asking, because Om is a very elevated thing, how can we say that it is only regarding the Brahman effulgence, right? And so at least what my teacher told me, he didn't give a direct pramana, but so that's why I'm making it very clear what my source is. But of course, he was teaching Bhakti-śāstrī for the Mayapur Institute, and he's a lifelong brahmachari, so he's somewhat reliable a source, right? Even if he did speculate, it's a very reliable philosophical speculation. He was saying that actually Omkar, it refers to all three, right? Bhagavan, Paramatma, and Brahman, right? However, because it has a specific flavor, it's especially attached to by the impersonalists. When we say Krishna, it is filled, right? It is filled with personhood. I don't understand how Mayavadis chant the name Krishna, right? I mean, all the power to them, at least they're chanting, right? Chanting the offended name, but they are chanting, right? But Krishna carries all, you know, the all attractive personality. It carries so many flavors of personality. Whereas Omkar, when we chant Om, this can actually refer to all three levels. However, because it has a certain abstract feeling to it, it is able to be used in that impersonalist way, right? And therefore, especially for the impersonalists, they have this specific attachment. Does this make sense? So Om can be used to refer to any of them. That was the answer that I was given. I need to find a stronger pramana for it, but at the very least, it makes sense and it doesn't seem to contradict anything. So this Om syllable has a certain universality to it. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, it's described that the flapping wings of Garuda, if one hears them, one would hear the hymns of the Vedic literature, right? A wonderful description by in the Srimad Bhagavatam. One would hear these wonderful, wonderful hymns. But interestingly, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada, he says, if actually one would just be hearing the chanting of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, right? This is what Srila Prabhupada says one would hear. So even though Srimad Bhagavatam says one would hear the recitation of the Vedic hymns, Srila Prabhupada says you would actually hear the Mahamantra, because the Mahamantra is the essence of chanting all the Vedic hymns, right? All the Vedic hymns are captured up in this chanting of Hare Krishna. And so we find a similar thing here. Whenever we find glorifications of the Om syllable, we should think that all of these glorifications so much are captured in the chanting of Hare Krishna. So even though the Omkar can be used in that sense, still, as devotees, we should maintain our attachment to Hare Krishna. There is no glory for any syllable or any name or any mantra that is not even more perfectly or as perfectly found in the chanting of Hare Krishna. Okay? So, just to make that point clear. So let's keep going. And of course, Srila Prabhupada, he makes again a similar point at the end of the purport. So text 12 is continuing this description, because of course in 11 we heard just a slight description again, right? Of what are the things that one needs to do before engaging in this process. I won't do more yoga studio bashing. That was what the 6th chapter was for, but we can keep on doing that, right? I don't think I know any yoga studios where if you go there, they say, let's be celibate. You know, if anything, I don't think the teachers are all that celibate either. So we'll keep on going. Maybe Shivam Prabhu, you can say the English after I finish the Sanskrit. Sarva dvarani samyamya manohriddhi nirudhya cha murdhyanadhyatmana pranam asthito yoga dharanam.
The yogic situation is that of detachment from all sensual engagements, closing all the doors of the senses and fixing the mind on the heart and the life air at the top of the head. One establishes himself in yoga.
Okay, and then I'm going to go straight to text 13. And maybe Katyayani Mataji can read the English. Om itekaksharam brahma vyaharan mam anusmaran yah prayati tyajan deham sayati paramam gatim.
After being situated in this yoga practice and vibrating the sacred syllable Om, the supreme combination of letters, if one thinks of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and quits his body, he will certainly reach the spiritual planets. Thank you, Prabhu.
Jai, Hare Krishna. And so we find very nicely here, Srila Prabhupada, he is reiterating the point, right? It is clearly stated here that Om, Brahman, and Lord Krishna are not different. The impersonal sound of Krishna is Om, but the sound Hare Krishna contains Om. The chanting of Hare Krishna mantra is clearly recommended for this age. And then we keep on going again with glorification. So again, as I was saying earlier, I haven't found a direct pramana that Om can directly refer to Krishna as well, but I think we tend to hear it, right? I think, how do I put it? There's a lot of strong indirect pramanas. If anyone can think of a really direct pramana, please shoot it my way. But there's lots of indirect pramanas like this one. In Srimad Bhagavatam, you'll find a few texts that seem to associate Omkar with Bhagavan as well. Again, that's just from my reading of Srimad Bhagavatam. I haven't read it too many times, only a handful. So if anyone has found any other references, please shoot it my way.
Isn't the verse that he is the syllable Om enough?
Yeah, but then also you can think about it. He says all these other things, right? That he is, you know what I mean? He also says,
but it's not just poetry, right?
No, it's not just poetry, but he also says stuff like, of demons, I am Prahlad Maharaj. And I don't think we want to be saying that Prahlad Maharaj is a Vishnu Tattva. You get what I mean? So like there's a slightly different point being made there. But again, it's a strong indirect, it's not a, how do I put it? It's not 100% locked in, but it seems to be heavily indicating it. I'm fully with you. It's heavily, as is this one, right? What is Srila Prabhupada saying here? Om, Brahman, and Lord Krishna are not different, right? But then Srila Prabhupada seems to qualify it again by saying the impersonal sound of Krishna is Om, but the sound Hare Krishna contains Om. So a little bit nuanced. So yeah, but again, we have that similar point. Irregardless, or rather regardless, Om is the sound of Krishna, but it has that impersonal flavor. Whereas the sound Hare Krishna contains Om, but it is incredibly personal, right? And this is just a nectar purport. I'll read the rest of it. So if one quits his body at the end of life chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, he certainly reaches one of the spiritual planets, according to the mode of his practice. The devotees of Krishna enter the Krishna planet, Goloka Vrindavan. For the personalists, there are also innumerable other planets, known as Vaikuntha planets, in the spiritual sky, whereas the impersonalists remain in the Brahma Jyotir. Okay, so let's keep going. So now that we have discussed this remembrance of Krishna by Yoga Mishra Bhakti, because again, what is the point of this chapter? It is about attaining the Supreme. And how do we attain the Supreme? Quite clearly, we attain it through Krishna consciousness. We attain it through meditating upon Krishna. And so Krishna, he's described the method of meditating on Krishna, that is Yoga Mishra Bhakti. Now with text 14, we are really entering into the nectar. And what is the nectar? It is remembering Krishna through pure bhakti. If I am not mistaken, this is one of your memory shlokas, right? Or am I mistaken? I'm not mistaken. This is one of the memory shlokas, or this is not one of them? It's not one of them. Okay. Well, I was going to test you all. It is. It is or it isn't. I'm getting mixed signals. Who can tell me? Who's on top of their shloka memorization? It's not. Okay. It should be.
16.
It's 16. Okay. I knew it was one of this section. I thought it was 14. 16 is also nectar. They're all nectar. This 14 to all of the Bhagavad-gītā is nectar, but 14 to 16, look, I know none of you will do it, but memorize 14 as well, okay? Add it to your list. I won't test you for it, but just for your own Krishna consciousness, this is such a nectarian shloka. Maybe Mrugank Prabhu can say the English. His camera went off, but I hope, wait, is it still off? But I hope that means, oh wait, is he in the call? No, I think he had to dip. Oh no, he's here. If Mrugank Prabhu doesn't say it, Vishaka Mataji can say it. Okay. Ananya cheta satatam yomam smarati nityashaha tasyaham sulabha partha nitya yuktasya yoginaha.
For one who always remembers me without deviation, I am easy to obtain, O Smitāmṛta, because of his constant engagement in devotional service.
Jai. So this text, now Krishna, he's switching over to the best way for remembering Krishna. And what is that? That is through pure bhakti. So again, 14 to 16 are very nectarian, and they're already building up a theme, because we are having a theme of the destination of the Supreme, right? Attaining the Supreme means what, right? Yes, it means remembering Krishna. Yes, it means loving Krishna. It means all of these things, but it also means attaining his abode. So when we're talking about attaining the Supreme in this chapter, we are talking about the means by which we attain Krishna. But attaining Krishna means going to live with Krishna. By the way, I scratched the activity for this week. It is going to be 2 hours of me talking. I do apologize, but because we missed last week, I wanted to just be a little quick this week. My, Vachakalpa Tarabhyascha, sorry, you're going to have to hear me talk for a while. Okay, so this whole chapter is about attaining the Supreme, okay? And attaining the Supreme means attaining the destination where the Supreme Lord is, right? Parabrahman, Parandhama, right? All of these things are related, they are together, which is why Srila Prabhupada, in the purports that I've already read out, he's already starting to mention Vaikuntha, Goloka, Brahma Jyoti, right? We're talking about destinations, okay? Because where you are, where you go is obviously very central to that, right? If the average, even if any of us passes away, which normally would be unfortunate, but if we're going to the spiritual world, it is fortunate, right? But if we end up in Vaikuntha, we'll be very upset, right? Vaikuntha is very glorious, but we want to be there where Krishna's running around in Golok Vrindavan, right? In the same way, if a devotee of Nrsingadev very devoutly gives his whole life worshipping Nrsingadev, and then he goes back home back to Godhead and he's in Goloka Vrindavan, he's going to be a little bit confused, right? So, and of course, the impersonal is the same thing. So because of that, the actual destination you're going to is central to the goal you're achieving, okay? So this is going to be a discussion point that we hit right after we finish the section on pure bhakti. But I'm just telling you to keep that in mind, because that is a background consideration throughout this chapter, and it's going to become explicit after we finish text 16. Okay, so before we keep on going, again, nectarian text. And we find that there is a certain text that is there's a certain word or a certain phrase that's very central to here. This is me quizzing now, who's actually read the chapter. Who can tell me in the purport, which word does Srila Prabhupada really focus on? There's one word or phrase that Prabhupada really, really hones in on. I'll get it up. I'm just scrolling through. If anyone has their Gita with them, they can also check.
Is it the word satatam?
Yes. So satatam and nityashaha, right? Srila Prabhupada is emphasizing that these are the qualifications of the pure devotee, right? So constantly one is remembering Krishna and meditating upon him. Again, His Holiness Gaur Govinda Maharaj's advice comes in hand, right? We must be always absorbed in Krishna. Again, how this is possible, when we come to Nectar of Devotion, we will discuss this, all the different varieties of practical meditation, right? And we find this, right? Constantly meditating. When Uddhav arrived in Vrindavan, I find this is the most perfect example, right? Because for most of us, what are we doing? We are struggling to remember Krishna. At least I am, right? We are trying to remember Krishna, and yet we're not thinking about him. What's the famous thing Srila Prabhupada said? It's not that you are Krishna conscious, and sometimes you're thinking about Maya. It's that you're thinking about Maya, and sometimes you're thinking about Krishna, right? This is the situation for most of us as conditioned souls. And yet what happens when Uddhav arrives with the message to the Brijvasis, right? What happens? He sees all of these people who are trying to forget Krishna, and yet they can't, right? They are having the opposite issue we are having, right? We are trying to remember Krishna, and yet we are always forgetting him. But when Uddhava sees all the devotees in Vrindavan, what does Mother Jashoda say? This is, I think, the most perfect example of satatam, right? She says, whenever I'm asleep, I dream only of my sweet Krishna. And whenever I'm awake, all around me, I see the grass fields where Krishna used to run around and play in. I see the trees which Krishna used to climb up in. I see the cows who Krishna used to take care of when they were calves, right? I see all of these things. When I'm asleep, I think only of Krishna. When I'm awake, I think only of Krishna. And even when I close my eyes so that I don't see all of these things around me, all I see is the darkness behind my eyes, and all I can think of is the beautiful dark Shyam Sundar skin of Krishna, right? If my eyes are open when I'm awake, if my eyes are closed, if I'm sleeping, if I'm awake, no matter what, all I can think about is Krishna, right? This is Krishna consciousness. This is satatam, right? They are thinking all of our pain, the pain of separation we are feeling, it could just end like this if we could just forget Krishna for one moment. And yet we can't. This is satatam. This is constantly. This is regularly. This is every day, right? This is what we are hoping to achieve some taste of, right? Again, bhakti yoga is so easy, but it is also so elevated, right? This is, at least for me, this is almost inconceivable, right? It's the point I was making earlier. People sometimes say, how so many soldiers they fought on Kurukshetra? This is inconceivable. I think this is much, much more inconceivable. How somebody can be so deeply absorbed in meditation of Krishna, right? Very, very elevated position. So this is what we mean by satatam, right? Very, very elevated position. And so this is what we should be aspiring for. Krishna consciousness is fun. It is easy in many senses. It is very straightforward, but it is also very deep. We should not take it so easily. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada, he gives such a wonderful purport. My open book test when I did my Bhakti-śāstrī was on this purport. I had to write about the message of this purport and how Srila Prabhupada embodied this purport fully. It's a fun activity to do in your own time, just to meditate about how much Srila Prabhupada in his own life fulfills the entirety of this purport. Another point that our acharyas really comment upon is ananya chetaha, right? And this is focused upon in order to make the point that this now is discussing bhakti, right? Without deviation of the mind, without deviation for anything else. What does Srila Prabhupada mention, right? Without deviation from all these other processes, right? Karma yoga, jnana yoga, hatha yoga, we've described all of these things, right? All of these principles have been discussed. What does Srila Prabhupada say? But this verse particularly mentions pure bhakti yoga, right? Anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karmadhyanavritam anukul yena Krsna nu shilanam bhaktir uttama, right? Without any traces of any desire for karma, for jnana, devoid of all of these things, right? Simply with the desire to please Krishna. This is uttama bhakti, right? And this is what we are having described here, as indicated by the word ananya chetaha. When I asked the question earlier, it was almost a trick question. I was either after satatam or ananya chetaha. Either one I was looking for, right? In pure bhakti yoga, the devotees desire nothing but Krishna, right? A pure devotee does not desire promotion to heavenly planets, nor does he desire or any of these other things, okay? This is pure devotion. Sometimes you'll hear devotees, and I think I've made this point before, I'm going to make it again. Sometimes I hear younger devotees especially, right? I mean, I'm a younger devotee too, but I mean very, very young devotees, right? They'll make this point sometimes when they're starting to preach, and they'll say, go do Krishna consciousness so we can be liberated, right? We are doing Krishna consciousness so we can go to Vaikuntha, right? We are not doing Krishna consciousness so we can go to Vaikuntha. We are performing Krishna consciousness so we can do nothing but please Krishna, right? This is the goal. And if we are not doing it for that reason, then we are performing Krishna consciousness so that reason can become our goal, right? Nothing but pleasing Krishna. What does Bhaktivinoda Thakur say? Throw it all away. I don't want any of this. Don't make me a Brahma. Don't give me any sort of liberation. Even if I can be a worm, just let me be a worm in the association of the devotees. Again, very, very high, very, very elevated. As much as I'd like to think I would say, you know, let me go back home, let me go associate with the devotees, I'll probably choose Vaikuntha, right? I'm not at that level. But by all of your blessings, maybe one day I can aspire for something greater. And now we come to the final point. And I want to make this point just slightly. I don't want to touch on controversies, but sometimes you will hear, if you spend a lot of time, especially when you're going to the holy Dham, you won't find too many of these people. Most people, even outside of ISKCON, even outside of the whole family, we are all in the family of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, right? Even outside of that family, most people have a whole lot of reverence for Srila Prabhupada. But sometimes they will say, you'll hear envious individuals, right? And they will say, Srila Prabhupada is not so rasik. Srila Prabhupada, sometimes they'll say, he taught you how to worship Vishnu, but he didn't teach how to worship Krishna. You'll hear nonsense like this, right? And what will they say? They'll say, Srila Prabhupada, he was not very rasik, right? He was not giving this Vrindavan mood. They will say like this. Firstly, if anyone says that they haven't read Chaitanya Charitamrita, sometimes when you read Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's so rasik, you feel like, you know, maybe I'm not qualified to read this yet, right? Simply rascals, yes, we can get into our smashing mood. But this section especially is so very rasik and deep. And not only that, it shows that Srila Prabhupada was deeply rasik in every moment. Maybe Mrugank Prabhu, would you like to read out this paragraph here?
Yeah. The special qualification of the pure devotee is that he is always thinking of Krishna without deviation, without considering the time or place. There should be no impediments. He should be able to carry out his service anywhere and at any time. Some say that the devotee should remain in holy places like Vrindavan or some holy town where the Lord lived, but a pure devotee can live anywhere and create the atmosphere of Vrindavan by his devotional service. It was Sri Advaita who told Lord Chaitanya, wherever you are, O Lord, there is Vrindavan.
Jai. Very, very nectar. And in of itself, it's just very rasik. Like people who say Srila Prabhupada is not preaching the Vrindavan mood, forget about not having read Chaitanya Charitamrita. they've not read the Bhagavad-gītā either, okay? So if you ever hear anyone saying that nonsense, and eventually you will, just by the course of your spiritual life, unfortunately, just know that, yeah, they clearly have not studied Bhagavad-gītā as it is. But not only that, but what are we seeing, right? They're having some sort of materialist understanding, right? That Vrindavan is captured in some geographical location, right? And so Srila Prabhupada, by encouraging people to do their sadhana in whichever temples, right? Prabhupada's not giving the highest thing. He's just giving something easy that you can do when you're not in India, right? But this is reducing Vrindavan to geography, which is actually Dham aparad. When we find the list of the aparads, the offenses against the Dham, one of them is to consider the Dham to be a geographical location. A little bit inconceivable because we still have to land into Delhi airport, right? In order to go to Vrindavan. So a little inconceivable because for our experience, it seems to be geographical. But it is an aparad to limit it or to curtail it as to being a simple geographical expression. And so what is Srila Prabhupada saying? Some say that the devotee should remain in holy places like Vrindavan or some holy town where the Lord lived, but a pure devotee can live anywhere and create the atmosphere of Vrindavan by his devotional service. This is said by our acharyas, and in fact, it's said in the Shastras, right? What is a definition of a tirtha, right? A tirtha, a holy place. How is it defined? It's defined because sadhus are living there. This is the definition of the Dham. His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, right? Does anyone know where did he perform his transcendental Antya Leela? Does anyone know?
Was it in Africa somewhere?
No, it was in.
It was America.
It was in Gitanagari farm, right? Why did he do that? You know, why didn't he go? Why didn't he go to why didn't he go to the holy Dham of Vrindavan, right?
Because he wanted to show that Vrindavan is where the devotees are.
Exactly, right? It's not that he didn't have the capacity to go to Vrindavan. It's not that he didn't know that he was concluding his pastimes. It's not that he didn't have any attachment to Vrindavan, right? I mean, if anyone had attachment to Vrindavan, right, it's Srila Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, right? But he's trying to make that point. Where the devotees are, there is a holy Dham, there is Vrindavan. And so it is the higher conception to understand all of these things. It is not that Srila Prabhupada did not come to preach the Vrindavan mood. Quite the opposite. Srila Prabhupada, by his activities, established Vrindavan all around the world. Quite the opposite, right? So this is a glorious Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada is very rasik, right? Very, very much in that Vrindavan mood. And again, if you ever have the misfortune of hearing anyone saying such nonsense, now we have at least just from this one section of Bhagavad-gītā, you can completely refute them, right? Just jealousy, right? Just jealousy about the achievements of Srila Prabhupada. Okay, so let's keep on going. So text 15 and 16, they, look, Srila Prabhupada has a lot of rasik moments. Especially his early classes. Interestingly enough, if you listen to Srila Prabhupada's early 1960s classes, he's telling all these rasik pastimes are very, very interesting. Anyways, so text 15 to 16 then are going ahead and they're describing the results one achieves by this ananya chetaha shuddha bhakti. We'll discuss these two and then we'll have our 5-minute break. So maybe Tanya Mataji can say the English after I've said text 15. Mam upetya punarjanma dukkhalayam ashashvatam na punavanti mahatmanaha samsiddhim paramam gataha.
After attaining me, the great souls who are yogis in devotion never return to this temporary world which is full of miseries, because they have attained the highest perfection.
Jai. So, very nicely, we hear here a wonderful description. Thank you for reading it out. We hear here a wonderful description, right? What is the destination for those who are doing these things? They never return to this temporary world. because they've attained the highest perfection. Again, as I was saying, it's a recurring underlying theme, right? Attaining the supreme means attaining the abode of the Lord, right? This is what is meant by attaining the supreme. And so this theme is coming out stronger and stronger. Just as a quick side note, if one is performing devotional service under Mahaprabhu and one is perfected in that way, one normally doesn't actually go straight back home, back to Godhead. One takes birth in whichever material world Krishna is currently in. And then once those pastimes are complete, then one goes back home, back to Godhead. Yeah, no, I'll talk about it now. I was going to say it might come in Nectar of Devotion, but it won't unless I bring it up. So I'll bring it up now. Now, basically, the idea is when one is going to Goloka Vrindavan, the levels of prema and ecstasy that one experiences can't be experienced in this current body. We talk about what's the highest level of devotion. We say it's prem, right? Prem is the highest level of devotion. But actually the Chaitanya Charitamrita says that higher than prem, there are higher levels like Mahabhav and stuff like that. But if our bodies were to experience Mahabhav right now, they would burn up. They would just explode, right? Our bodies would not be able to withstand that level. I mean, if you think about it, Mahaprabhu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself, he's experiencing these things, and what's happening? His teeth are coming loose, his limbs are going funny. Imagine what that's going to do to our bodies, okay, right? There's not going to be a material body left, okay? So because of that, one takes birth in a spiritual body, right? But in the pastimes that are happening with the Lord, so that one is able to cultivate those moods, right? So one is able to be trained up in those moods. Also, there also needs to be, because everyone is at a stationary age in Goloka, in the spiritual world, right? Because everyone's in that stationary age, you need to actually reach that age. You need to have created those memories. You need to mature into that age. So let's say, for example, you are, let's say, I'm trying to think of a random name, XYZ Gopa, okay? You're XYZ Gopa in the spiritual world, okay? That's your form in the spiritual world. So you need to take birth in a family, right? Because they need to know who you are. They need to have memories of who you are. So you take birth when Krishna is manifesting the pastimes, right, of growing up, and then you grow up alongside all of the associates of the Lord, and then now you've integrated yourselves into the pastimes. Now there is a memory of you. Now there is an understanding of you. Now you have memories of growing up with everyone. And because you've then been trained into that role, then when the Lord finishes his pastimes, then you get snatched up and then you enter into Goloka Vrindavan. So that's a bit of an honest topic, a little bit of a extra side note. Definitely won't be in your quiz, but it's an important point I just want to make. It's not that you go directly back home, back to Godhead, if you're attaining a form in Goloka Vrindavan. Just because, yeah, you would get that impression. This is speaking more generally of the general process, in which case you do go straight to Vaikuntha or something. This is wild. Yeah. Yeah, Srila Prabhupada mentions this in Srimad Bhagavatam. No, it's not in 10th canto. It's in 9th canto.
Yeah, like, I guess my question is why, if the only way we could have found out about this is to carefully read his book and then, like, you know, come up to that place in that purport where he talks about how, yeah, you have to be born into a place where there's a pastime, they'll train you and then you'll go somewhere else. If you had just said it straight up, then people wouldn't have fallen into this illusion.
Well, so there's two aspects. One, it's not the biggest misconception ever. Like, I don't think anyone's gonna, you know, have their, it's not an anartha, right, to have the, eventually you'll come around to it. I don't think it's the most important philosophical concept in the universe, right? I think it's important, especially when we're doing Bhakti-śāstrī and stuff. I'm trying to, you know, we're trying to push everyone to go deeper, you know what I mean? Like, then stuff like this is important. But I don't think Bhakta Bob needs to know that he's going to take birth in, you know what I mean, in the other universe where Krishna's in order to more deeply understand his Siddha-deha form, if you get what I mean. You see Srila Prabhupada does this stuff all the time. Like, Srila Prabhupada doesn't mention that there's two Krishnas in Krishna book, right? But in one purport in chapter 3 of the 10th canto, one of the early chapters of 10th canto, Srila Prabhupada, in one purport, he just says there are two Krishnas. The one that was born in Vrindavan and the one that was born in Dwarka, and then he just keeps on going, right? So these sort of details, like it's it's this interesting case where they're important, but they're not that important the first thing up. You know what I mean? Like, I think all of us here have managed to go, I mean, some of us already knew this, but those of us who didn't know this have managed to go pretty steadily in our Krishna consciousness without knowing that. And I don't think it's held us back, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, like I wasn't complaining. I was just saying.
No. I totally get what you're saying. I think the same thing.
People couldn't have come and said that Srila Prabhupada didn't give you rasik stuff if it was obvious that he gave us rasik stuff. But
Yeah. No, but I guess the point that I'm getting at there is that the rasik stuff is right here in Bhagavad-gītā. This isn't even a rasik detail. This is just a super philosophical technicality, if you get what I mean. So I wouldn't say technicality, that would be underselling it. But yeah, you get what I'm saying? I wouldn't say this is a point of proving that Srila Prabhupada is rasik, if you get what I mean. Yeah. But no, I get what you're saying. Yeah, Srikanta Sena Prabhu's raised his hand.
Yeah, there's some context around that as well, because like you said, Prabhupada was quite express with some of his statements about the spiritual body and spiritual life beyond in the Paravyoma at the start, but then gradually as there were more devotees in the movement and as the movement spread, that became less and less so, primarily because there seemed to be a misunderstanding as the devotees grew and some coalescence of some devotees thinking that certain pastimes were more important than others and being focused on a Siddha Dehe rather than establishing their own Vaidhi Bhakti. In one lecture, someone asked Prabhupada about Siddha Dehe and he exploded. And he says, what Siddha Dehe? You're not even following the 4 regulative principles.
Yeah, it's the classic,
yeah.
It's a classic, why are you wondering what your spiritual body is if you don't even know you're not this body, right?
Someone also said to him, oh, Prabhupada, we don't like reading about Krishna's childhood pastimes. We like reading about the goat. He's dancing with the gopis. And this was in LA during the crazy times.
The Gopi Bhava Club.
The Gopi Bhava Club. And he also exploded. So there was a legitimate reason for why it may not be so expressed, these details.
Yeah, and that's definitely there. We'll discuss that more when we get to Nectar of Devotion. We're doing lots of Nectar of Devotion right now. I can't help myself. Nectar of Devotion is my favorite book that we study in Bhakti-śāstrī. So, while that's there, on the other hand, this is in 9th canto when Srila Prabhupada is mentioning this. So I think that would have been post Gopi Bhava Club. So I don't think it's a rasik detail about taking birth in another world. I just think it's philosophical minutia in the same way that there's 2 Krishnas. I don't think it's the most important initial lesson. As you said, the more important initial lessons are worship Krishna, chant Hare Krishna, you're not this body, etc., etc. Okay, are there any questions on that note? Because we're never going to touch on that point again, basically until maybe a Nectar of Devotion. If anyone has any other questions on that, ask away now, otherwise we'll have our 5-minute break and then we'll come back. Okay, yeah, I'm happy you enjoyed the point, Rohan Prabhu. I think it's wild too. Okay, let's take our 5-minute break. I'll see you all at 20 past. Yeah, Hare Krishna. Okay, so continuing on from where we left off, we were discussing attaining the Lord, and then of course I made that little tangent about how devotees go. And so the emphasis that's made is that when one does attain this, they've attained it, right? They're locked in. We'll find that Krishna, he says, Mam Upetya. I'm pretty sure he also says in text 16, yeah, Mam Upetya, right? To me, to me, to me. He's making it very clear. Don't get tempted. Don't think about going anywhere else. We're talking about attaining the Supreme. Mam Upetya, right? Achieve me, achieve my abode. This is the Supreme. We've discussed everything else. Don't go to Indralok, please, for your own good, right? So this is the point that Krishna, he's emphasizing. Of course, impersonalists, actually, we'll discuss impersonalist destinations later. So going on from this, now we are hearing a description. Text 16 is a nice sort of segue. So we've been hearing about it, the different ways of remembering the Lord, right? How remembrance of the Lord means attaining him. Now we're going to hear about the nature of the spiritual domain in general, in contrast to the material one. Now I haven't gone to the text. Has anyone been good with their shloka memorization and got text 16 down already? Is anyone going to want to give it a crack? I'll give you bonus marks. You'll instantly pass Bhakti-śāstrī if you can do it right here, right now. Guaranteed 100%.
Abrahma bhuvanaloka punaravartina Arjuna mamupechyati kaunteya punarjanmana vidyate.
Jai. See, but the point is that's almost wasted because Mataji was anyways going to get 100% in Bhakti-śāstrī. So she yeah. Okay, so let's go with the translation. Maybe then Srinivas Prabhu, would you like to read out the translation?
From the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all the places of misery wherein repeated birth and death take place, but one who attains to my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Jai, thank you. So here we see what is the difference between the material world and the spiritual world. In the material world, we're getting born again and again and again and again. And in the spiritual world, one never takes birth again, right? So this is the contrast. And as I said, it's really segueing. Now we're about to segue really into the final section of the Bhagavad-gītā, of the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad-gītā, which is discussing the nature between the material versus the spiritual worlds. Now, actually, you'll be rather happy to know that I got rid of the activity because I was going to get all of you to redo the timelines again. There's a more detailed description almost of the different days, but I thought, seeing as we've already done that, I was really going to be a refresher because it will be in your closed book test. I will be asking about timelines. Not even a maybe, it will be in your test. So please keep that in mind. So no matter where you are, everyone's constantly getting born, right? This is just the nature. One is bound by the pains and sufferings of repeated birth and death, okay? Pretty straightforward. As we've already discussed, that's why demigod worship, and that's why Mamupetya, right? The highest planets in the material world, they're still bound by this essential misery, right? There is no happiness in this world. It's sometimes described that this material world is a world of negatives, right? So when you're suffering a lot, that's -10. When you're in a material heavenly planet, that's -1. That's a positive increase, right? So what we think of as pleasure, what we think of as happiness is just less suffering. There is less suffering in the heavenly planets. And therefore we say, wow, what a nice place, right? But what do we hear here? All are places of misery, right? Inherently, there is only misery. So what then is a spiritual world? The spiritual world then is the positive numbers, right? The Brahma Jyoti is 0. That's why the Brahma Jyoti is attractive, right? Because the Brahma Jyoti, there's no more suffering. Hari Bol, right? But there's no happiness either, which is why we like to shoot past the Brahma Jyoti and go right into Krishna's pastimes. Okay. And as I said, this is emphasizing the point that Krishna's making. Mamupetya. The attaining the absolute, attaining the supreme is not attaining the heavenly planets. It's not going where Indra is. It's not going to any of these planets. It's not even going to Brahmalok, right? It's going to the spiritual world. And so then we begin now the section describing the two worlds. Should I ask? Divyansh Prabhu can say the English after I've said the Sanskrit. Sahasra yuga paryantam aharyad brahmano viduhu ratrim yuga sahasrantam teho ratra vido janaha. If Divyansh Prabhu is AFK, we can have Mrinal Mataji.
By human calculation, 1,000 ages taken together form the duration of Brahma's one day, and such also is the duration of his night. Hare Krishna.
Jai. So we're hearing here now the contrast of the material world versus the spiritual world. And so what are we hearing? We are taking up a description of cosmology, right? We're getting an idea of the scale of the material world. 1,000 ages taken together form the duration of Brahma's one day, right? And such also is the duration of his night. Again, here we have, for your test, write this down. This purport here is what I will be basing the question off. This is a breaking down of cosmological lengths. Crunch these numbers, memorize them. You know, whatever you need to do, please memorize these. But here, by human calculation, 1,000 ages taken together form the duration of Brahma's one day, and such also is the duration of his night. And then at the beginning of Brahma's day, all living entities become manifest from the unmanifest state. And thereafter, when the night falls, they emerge into the unmanifest again. Again and again, when Brahma's day arrives, all living entities come into being. And with the arrival of Brahma's night, they are helplessly annihilated. I love this section. It's very existential. It's meant to imply that, right? So we're hearing here, what is the nature of the material world? What is it? These long, long times, right? How long is this, right? Just one day is 1,000 ages, right? And what happens during these days? Helplessly, the jivas are taking birth and then they're being annihilated, right? Not the jivas themselves, obviously, but the bodies that they're in, right? Helplessly like this is a constant cycle, right? It's almost depressing. It's pointless. It's this constant rehearsal, right? Of becoming manifest, living out all these desires, unable to fulfill them. And at the end, then everything is dissolved. And then you go back, right? Very, very almost depressing, right? I love this term by Srila Prabhupada, helplessly annihilated. That's the feeling that's being conveyed here. What is the nature of the material world? It is a helpless place, which is just going in circles nowhere, right? And it's all temporary. It's all, again, it goes from manifest to unmanifest, and then goes from unmanifest to manifest, and then unmanifest again, right? It's this constant cycle, okay? But then we hear, what is the nature then of the spiritual world? Well, Mrugank Prabhu has a question. We'll get to that question, and then we'll hear about the spiritual world.
Hey, so when it says unmanifest at the end of Brahma's day, I've heard only the lower planetary systems get annihilated. So, but the unmanifest seems to indicate that we merge into like Mahavishnu, but maybe I just have it the wrong way around. So how does that work?
No, yeah, my understanding is that I don't think there's a total pralaya, but I'm pretty sure the jivas all go back into, what's the term? Shushupti, that's what I'm looking for. Yeah, they go into Shushupti.
What is that?
The deep sleep of the jivas when they, yeah, there is no subtle, and there's no subtle activity, there's no gross activity. At night, it all sort of goes packed away. That's my understanding, at least.
Cool, thank you.
See, the problem is, I do with Srikanta Sena Prabhu's tip is that I do an arts degree, so multiplication actually makes it harder for me to remember than easier. I'll crunch the numbers wrong, but no, it is a good tip. That's how I memorize it as well. You just need to remember one length and then just multiply them. Tarun Prabhu, did you raise your hand?
Yes, Prabhu, I had similar question, and that was also related to the unmanifested state. Is it like those jiva go back into Brahma, or they sort of, you know how once you mentioned that jivas were sort of initially when Brahma created everything, like he was glowing or something, like all the the desires and everything were in the Brahma, and then hence Brahma created those.
I don't think, no. The only time, my understanding is the only time that the jivas return back to Brahma is the Mahapralaya. In 11th canto, you'll find a description of that. Brahma collects all the jivas and he puts them in his body, and then he disassembles his own body at the very end of the universe. Another way I'm thinking you could take this is it's also just saying that that just naturally throughout the day of Brahma, the bodies are getting unmanifested, manifest as we're going through different material bodies, right? That's another way you could also take it. But yeah, no, mine, the technical term is a samasti jiva, which means the collective jiva. It's when all of the jiva, it's when Brahma acts as the collective jiva with all the jivas inside him. My understanding is Brahma only becomes the samasti jiva again at the Mahapralaya, at the complete radical end of the universe. Because then he also dies. Like, I'll try and find this section in 11th canto for you all.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Yeah, but that's where we find a description of the very, very end. Okay, so now we'll hear about the spiritual world. Let's have Srimātaji. You can, no wait, have I already asked Sri? No, okay. Srimātaji can say the English. Parastasmat tubhavo nyo vyakto vyaktat sanatanaha yassa sarveshu bhuteshu nashyatsu na vinashyati.
Yet there is another unmanifest nature, which is eternal and is transcendental to this manifested and unmanifested matter. It is supreme and is never annihilated. When all in this world is annihilated, that part remains as it is.
Jai. And then we'll just do text 21 again, because they go very, very well. And maybe Rohan Prabhu can say the English for this. Avyakto kshara ityuktas tammahu paramam gatim yam prapya na vinivartante tadhama paramam mama.
That which the Vedantas describe as unmanifest and infallible, that which is known as the supreme destination, that place from which, having attained it, one never returns, that is my supreme abode.
Jai. So here we have the description. So as compared to the material world, right, which we've just heard described, as compared to that, we have this world which is eternal, right, which is transcendental. It is never annihilated, right? So here Krishna, he's making the point why this is what attaining the supreme means. It means to attain this abode. That other abode is clearly not the supreme, right? So come here and come to my abode and worship me there, right? That which the Vedantas describe as unmanifest and infallible, right? That which is known as supreme destination, that place from which, having attained, one never returns, that is my supreme abode, right? So here we find Krishna, he's connecting the two. This transcendental place, this amazing place, this is also the place where I am, right? This is the place where I am. Now, sometimes Mayavadis will take the term of vyakta, and they'll say it means formless. Again, I must always appeal to two things. Firstly, we find in Srimad Bhagavatam, again, Gajendra, he prays, oh, a formless Lord, oh, so and so and so and so. And then the very formed Vishnu appears before him, okay? So already we here find that even in Shastra, the word for formless can be used in other ways. Furthermore, though, we've heard constantly about how Krishna has maintained his form as eternal, how Krishna is not formless, how Krishna is not impersonal, right? Krishna has consistently taught this throughout the Bhagavad-gītā. We've discussed this not at length, but we've definitely emphasized it. If Krishna is saying that that is my supreme abode where I am, it would make very little sense if he's saying that's formless, because he's just emphasized that he has form, right? Which is why avyakta makes much more sense as either meaning unmanifest, especially in this context, because it's eternal, right? It never needs to be manifested, right? And we're comparing that to the material world that always does need to be manifested. So contextually, that makes sense. And also just, it's a way that we find that language often being used. So don't get misled by avyakta meaning that it means formless or impersonal or anything nonsensical as that, okay? And therefore, now that we've heard about the nature of this, now Krishna, he's going to come back and basically from text 22 to the end of the chapter, he's going to be glorifying bhakti again, okay? So he's described the nature of his abode, he's described that he lives in it, he's described it as the supreme, he's described how it is distinct from the material world, it is not a place of birth, old age, suffering, disease and death, right? It's none of this. He's described all of that. How to attain it now, he's coming right back just to emphasize it. How is it obtained? And we can have, true, have I not asked? I don't think I've asked Tarun Prabhu, have I? Either way, Tarun Prabhu will say the English. Purushasa parapartha bhaktya labhyastatvananyaya yasyanta sthani bhutani yena sarvam idam tatam.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is greater than all, is attainable by unalloyed devotion. Although he is present in his abode, he is all pervading and everything is situated within him.
So basically here, what we find is Krishna now, he's wrapping up his description of the spiritual world and coming back to bhakti, right? Again, unalloyed devotion, right? Ananyaya, right? It is unalloyed, it is pure bhakti, it is shuddha bhakti. It is again, anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karmadhyanabritam, right? It is devoid of all things. He's coming back to mentioning the ananya chetaha, right? The purely, completely absorbed bhakti. He is calling back to that. He's saying this is the means. And the means to what? What he has just described, all of that is achieved by that process, okay? And then of course we come back to another complex, slightly inconceivable. Why is Krishna referring to himself in the third person? I don't know. I guess he just is, right? He's already clearly identified himself as the Purusha and all, so I don't think it indicates a shift. But yeah, I'm not too sure why. I can't think of a reason off the top of my head why he's referring to himself in the third person, but he's already identified himself already, right? He said, all things rest on me. I'm the thread, as the thread through the necklace, all things rest on me, right? I am the source of all things, etc., etc. He's already identified himself as that. And now he's just describing that in the third person. I can't think of any particularly deeper reason. I can double check the Acharya's commentaries. They might have said something off the top of my head. I can't remember anything. But yeah, he's reiterating stuff that he's already said before. Maybe he's doing it so that it flows nicer because he's already said in the first person so much. Probably not. But yeah, no, I can't think of any reasons why. But Krishna now, he's coming back and he's making this point. And then in text 23, what do we hear? I'm going to start doubling up on people, I think. Oh wait, no, Shavina Mataji is here. Mataji can say English. I know I definitely haven't asked her yet. Yatra kale tvanavrittim avritim chaiva yoginaha prayata yanti tam kalam vakshyami bharatarshabha. Mataji, I think you're muted, maybe?
Sorry, Prabhuji, I read
No
that
problem.
and then I realized, okay.
Yeah.
O best of the Bharatas, I shall now explain to you the different times at which, passing away from this world, the yogi does or does not come back. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Okay. So then we're coming now again to the final discussion of method, right? We've discussed already method. We've discussed already the destination of based on how people pass away, right? Again, so essential to this. The way one passes away is key to understanding where they'll go in their next life. And so Krishna, he's coming, in one sense, chapter 8 is like a circle, right? It sort of begins with discussions of passing away and then how to attain the abode through pure bhakti. Then it goes to the nature of the abode. Then it goes to attaining the abode through pure bhakti. And then at the last point, it talks about the essence of where one's mind is at the time of death. So in a sense, it's almost circular, this chapter. Krishna, he makes his points one way and then he makes them again the other way. So he's making a slightly distinct point here. We'll discuss text 24 to 26. not going to say the Sanskrit, not for any reason other than this section is relatively, it's all rather contrastive, I find. So those who know the Supreme Brahman attain that Supreme by passing away from the world during the influence of the fiery God, in the light, at an auspicious moment of the day, during the fortnight of the waxing moon, or during the 6 months when the sun travels in the north. The mystic who passes away from this world during the smoke, the night, the fortnight of the waning moon, or the 6 months when the sun passes to the south, reaches the moon planet, but again comes back. And according to Vedic opinion, there are two ways of passing from this world, one in light and one in darkness. When one passes in light, he does not come back, but when one passes in darkness, he returns. So what do we find here is that there are two general categories, okay? That of the light and that of the dark, okay? Now, what do we think this means? What implication do we think this carries for devotees? What is, yeah.
It's not applicable for the devotee, Prabhu.
Jai, yes, that's exactly it, okay? This is not referring to the devotees. This reflects on the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. I'm not too astrological enough. I will accept your greater knowledge in Jyotish than mine. And yeah, good to die in Ekadashi. Actually, His Holiness Bhakti-Vikas Maharaj, he made this point when it was the disappearance of his grace, Gopi Paranadhana, who maybe many of you will know from being the great translator. He was one of the team that translated the 10th, 11th, and 12th cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam. He also did the translations of Brihad Bhagavatamṛta that the BBT published and all, right? And so Bhakti-Vikas Maharaj, he was speaking on his disappearance, and he was making the point that that sometimes we'll say, oh, what an auspicious day to leave your body. He left his body in Kartik, or he left his body on Janmashtami, or he left his body on Ekadashi. Wow, how auspicious. But His Holiness Bhakti-Vikas Maharaj, he was saying, actually, by virtue of the fact of a great devotee passing away, this day has become auspicious. The day is now auspicious, irregardless of whatever else has happened on it, right? So this has now become an auspicious day, right? This is the nature of devotion, right? It is transcendental to all things and it transforms all things, right? So what is the point of this? The point of this is that all of this has to do for the Jnani and the Karmakandi, okay? This has to do with other people. For devotees, this doesn't matter. Devotees, we can pass, well, those of us who are trying, once we are on the devotional level, devotees can pass away in any way they want, right? In the most inauspicious way you can think about, a devotee will pass away and it becomes auspicious, okay? There is no inauspiciousness for the passing away of a devotee, okay? Time, place, circumstance, all of these things are made inherently auspicious by virtue of the fact that the devotee passed away, right? And we see this. This is the transformative nature of bhakti. I remember when I was in Mayapur, His Holiness Jayapataka Maharaj, he was giving a Gaur Purnima class, and he was talking about how inauspicious the eclipse is, right? And so one devotee asked a question. They said, if it's so inauspicious, why did Mahaprabhu appear at this time, right? And His Holiness Jayapataka Maharaj, he started laughing. And then he said, because of how inauspicious that time is, everyone began to start chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And by virtue of chanting this, right? By virtue of chanting this, suddenly the inauspicious time became the most auspicious time, okay? So when we hear these things have to do with those who are walking the path, not of bhakti, but of the path that requires all sorts of material qualifications. To properly do jnana yoga, like you have to have a lot of material qualifications, actually, especially if you want to do it in the lines of Shankaracharya, right? Shankaracharya, you have to be born a man in a Brahmin family. You have to then do all of these. You don't straight up do jnana yoga, right? That's what these contemporary Mayavadis who claim to be representing Shankaracharya, they're missing it, because Shankaracharya was saying you had to do all of this stuff before you could even begin doing jnana yoga, right? Again, Krishna consciousness is much, much easier, right? You just jump into the kirtan and Hari Bol, you've already, you're perfect already, right? But yeah, All of these other processes, they can be influenced by these things. Bhakti is transcendental. So Srinivas Prabhu was asking a question, and then I'll come to Taran Prabhu's question.
Yes, Prabhuji. So how do we understand, like, we know that Bhishma Dev is a great devotee of Lord. And we were reading that he was waiting to leave the body until the Uttarayana time comes place. So how do we understand this, Prabhuji?
Yeah, so it's pastime questions always, like, there's always a few dimensions to it, right? The most basic dimension is always that it in a weird way, it's the biggest cop-out, but it's also not when we go deep into the philosophy. It's a pastime, right? At one point, that's how he wanted to act out the pastime, if you get what I mean. But you can go a bit deeper than that, don't worry, I won't cop out that much. But there's a few aspects. One is he's playing the role of this very dharmic, perfect person, right? You know what I mean? Like, that's so much issue comes up because he's so rigid following the rules of Dharma, right? So this is following it. Just because he didn't need to doesn't mean he didn't want to. That's his mood, that's his personality, right? He's trying to fulfill these very dharmic prescriptions, right? And on the other hand, just because we don't need to leave, just because the devotee doesn't need to pass away at an auspicious time doesn't mean we wouldn't want to, right? It's like Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada would say, you can, at times he would say, it doesn't matter, do whatever. But if you can make it an auspicious time, why wouldn't you? You know what I mean? Technically, we can chant our rounds whenever we want, but we would still rather chant them at Mongol Aarti time. You get what I mean? Just because there's that freedom, there is that, yeah. And of course, it's a little different from us because we're not fully transcendental like he is, right? So we're still impacted by material factors still, right? We're not controlled by them. We can still act freely, but we're still influenced enough so we want to gain benefit. And in that sense, you also have another dimension. He also would be wanting to set an example for those individuals who are materially influenced, right? So there's a few dimensions to it. On the one hand, he's very much rules of the law. He wants to follow everything really paka, you know what I mean? On the other hand, if you have the freedom to, why not do it in an auspicious time? And on the other hand, also, he wants to set an example for those people who are going to look up to him, who are going to cite him. Again, what great men do, lesser men follow, right? This is a Gita principle, right? So he's trying to set the example of the importance of auspiciousness and all of these other things, right? But for him, again, he's transcendental, right? He can do whatever he wants. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Prabhuji. Yes.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's also the classic, it's a pastime, Hari Bol. But yeah, okay, Taran Prabhu, what is your question?
Prabhu, the question is kind of related. Prabhu, here they said that those who pass in the light, they don't come back, and those who pass in the sort of a dark, then they comes back. But the sentence starts with those who know the Supreme Brahman attains the Supreme. So the pre-qualification is that you must know the Supreme Brahman and you must pass in the light, so you don't come back. So even if you know the Supreme Brahman and you pass in the dark, then you could potentially come back. And could it be another reason why bhakti is so glorious that it bypasses, like it goes beyond the light and dark and the risk that even knowing Brahman and then you accidentally die, you pass away in the dark, and hey, you are back again?
Oh, no, absolutely. That's the point that I was making. Bhakti is beyond all material factors, right? This is the point that we were trying to make consistently, that all these other things will engage with material factors, but bhakti is beyond all of it, right? I mean, what to speak about knowing the Supreme Brahman? The devotee knows the Supreme Bhagavan, right? Completely beyond all of these factors, right? So these things you don't need. That was the point. That's why I raised it. And Katyani Mataji very nicely told us this does not apply to devotees. We don't need to worry about this. This here right now is information about the Gyanis, right? And that's why when we reach the final text, we'll see that this is yet again another glorification of bhakti. I genuinely don't understand how people read the Gita in a non-devotional way. And I don't mean that in a, like, I've read like impersonalist commentaries, and it's just so many backflips to avoid like this quite clear point of emphasis, right? Yeah, no, that's exactly the point, right? So bhakti is beyond any material consideration, Again, we consider it because we ourselves personally are not beyond material considerations. We're not yet at that platform, but bhakti itself is beyond that. And the deeper and deeper we go into bhakti, the less and less these things are a concern. Okay, so so we hear these things. Text 24, the Gyani who leaves, it's described actually, I think in the purport, that these presiding deities, they're the ones who are required to help carry the impersonalist or the Gyani into the impersonal Brahman, okay? So they assist in this process, that's why they need to be there. And of course, anyone who's perfected themselves in the Jnana Yoga, like the Ashtanga Yoga, Jnana Yogi and all of them can control the time they leave their body anyways, right? So they're controlling it to leave at this certain auspicious time, and then the demigods sort of help them in their process of attaining the Brahma Jyoti. However, 25 refers much more to the karmis, right? The karma kandis, right? So they pass away at night, right? And they get carried into the heavenly planets, and that's why they come back down again, okay? Now, a quick side note, very famously, when one attains the Brahma Jyoti, what happens? Do you stay there forever?
No, we'll have to come back.
You have to come back. This is an interesting point, and I just want to raise this. I'm not, how do I put it? If you hear otherwise from your respective primary, whoever you're under the shelter of, then please take their perspective. I've heard varying perspectives on this. Don't worry, I'm not going to get controversial. It sounds like I am, but this is just a minor point of difference. At least from how I have been taught, my understanding is that some stay, is that Mayavadis who attain this and drop down, but certain impersonalists who will be doing stuff like Yoga Mishra Bhakti and stuff, they actually stay there forever. You will find varying perspectives. So please, that's why I'm flagging that. So please, check that against whoever your primary source of information is. But I've heard this from I'll just give you my pramanas just so that it's not just my opinion. Shivaram Maharaj and a few other devotees I've heard that from. But I've also heard other devotees say that quite literally every jiva that goes to the Brahma Jyoti will eventually fall down again. Whereas I've heard from others that some fall down, the ones who didn't perfectly attain the goal.
Prabhu, confusion on this point as well. As you said, like there's a few things that are being said. Generally, somebody who attains a supreme Brahman is no easy feat. And they have also, to a degree, like they have no other desires left to be even reach there. Now they have, if there are no desire left, therefore they can have no body because it's our bodies. This is all my understanding is just an expression of our desire. It's like what we want, we are making ourselves. And if they are there, as you said, like different perspective, then if those who come back, what kind of body they will get if they have no desire?
So, I mean, I don't want to cut you off. Is that your question, or is there anything else?
Yes, so there's statements I hear, like in quite a lot of lectures, they say that some even say that, they go to Brahma Jyoti and then they get bored and then therefore they come back, but they never have desire. So getting bored is like I don't know, like it's a very complex thing. Like there is no body left.
No, because desires aren't part of your body. Desires are part of your soul. You never get rid of desires. Desires are not something you ever get rid of. Desire comes from the soul, not from the body. Desire is inappropriately expressed through the body. Desire is inappropriately expressed in order to create the body, but desire is the nature of the soul, and that's why they get bored. You're only human after all, I guess you can say, right? Like at the end of the day, you want to do things, and that's what happens, right? So they're there and they sort of think, you know what, like as much as I like swimming in an ocean of infinite light, I'm getting bored, and then you sort of drop down. In terms of what body they get, my understanding is you take birth as a Brahma. Your first birth in the material world is as a Brahma. So I would assume that applies there, because those imperfections haven't been fully, if you get what I mean. What's the term? Your imperfect desires are still pure enough that you sort of get a rather high birth. That's my understanding. But yeah, so yeah, you pop out because you're bored. Just one thing, if you can save the question just for the question time, because I just want to finish this chapter. We're like 2 texts away from finishing and we're getting dangerously close. I don't want to go over time, but please save the question. I definitely want to discuss it more, but let's just wrap up the chapter. Okay, so we discussed 26. Okay, so then 27. Although the devotees know these 2 parts, O Arjuna, they are never bewildered. Therefore, be always fixed in devotion. Again, there's the point. The devotee is not fussed with either of these directions, okay? Neither of these directions affect the devotee. The devotee is transcendental to them, okay? As Srila Prabhupada says, Krishna is here advising Arjuna that he should not be disturbed by the different paths a soul can take when leaving the material world, right? A devotee of the Supreme Lord should not worry whether he'll depart by arrangement or by accident, okay? Because Krishna, he is always taking care of the devotee. There is absolutely zero concern. So again, all of this is literally just there in the same way that we're hearing about the material world to understand that the spiritual world is better. We're hearing about these destinations to understand that the Bhakti Marg is better, okay? We've heard about the precarious nature of all these other methods. There is no precarious nature to that of Bhakti, okay? And then now finally, we conclude on this text, and we will discuss this text more actually next week. We have concluded these chapters, but we'll do it as a refresher because this text is the summary study of chapter 7 and 8. Chapter 8, text 28, is the whole summary of everything we've discussed so far. So I'll say the Sanskrit and maybe we can have, actually, Srikanta Sena Prabhu can say the English because I only asked him to do a tiny little bit of a purport earlier. Vedeshu yageshu tapassu chaiva daneshu yat punya phalam pradishtam atyeti tat sarvam vidam viditva yogi param sthanam upaiti chadyam.
A person who accepts the path of devotional service is not bereft of the results derived from studying the Vedas, performing sacrifices, undergoing austerities, giving charity, or pursuing philosophical and fruitive activities. Simply by performing devotional service, he attains all these, and at the end, he reaches the supreme eternal abode.
Yeah, so we will discuss this more next week anyway, so I've ended perfectly on time. I'm very happy with myself. So we'll discuss that more as a summary next week as we lead into chapter 9, which very much builds upon these things. Chapter 9 is the most confidential knowledge, so let that whet your appetite. Also, before people start leaving, the homework is read up until text, read until text 14 in chapter 9, okay? So that's the homework. Please get that done. We will discuss further then. But yeah, so this final text, it's summarizing everything. We heard that the devotee is beyond the Jnani, beyond the yogi, beyond all of these other things. This is how the devotee is like that. Krishna is giving the express reasons, and this ties into everything else, as we will discuss more next week as we lead into chapter 9. Okay, Taran Prabhu, then if you want to continue with your questions, and then as always, everyone's free to leave now or stay around if you have any questions or anything.
Prabhu, my related question is also some of the fundamental lack of my knowledge. So we have like a suksham, like a sharir, and then we have sort of a mind. So when someone is in the Brahma Jyoti, is their mind still with them, or have they the mind?
There's no mind. There's no mind. Just jiva.
Okay. So and jiva constitutes to the ahankara and the basically soul.
No, jiva in this sense means just the atma. Just the pure consciousness. Ahankar doesn't exist anymore. Ahankar has been eroded. Ahankar is material. It can't exist in the Brahma Jyoti. Ahankar is made of matter.
So they are past the mind and they are past the ahankar, and now that's
everything else. There's nothing else left.
Okay.
But still, desire is there. Because jiber shurup hoy, Krishner nitto das, right? the inherent nature of the jiva, the inherent swarup, the inherent form is that of a servant of Krishna. Inherently, the jiva wants to enjoy Krishna.
So desire is kind of a property of the Atma itself.
Yeah, that's the point we're making. That's why it gets bored. Desire is a property of the Atma. It's not a desire of the material body or the mind or anything. Desire is inherently the Atma.
Okay.
There's 4 or 5 qualities Jiva Goswami gives of the jiva. It desires identity. No, it creates identity. It has desires. It has motion, and I forgot the last one. I'll need to double check. It's somewhere in the Sandarbhas. So they're these inherent natures. Yeah, I was also going to ask Prabhu to send the Vedanta Sutra reference that he found. But yeah, no, Jiva Goswami, he describes multiple. I'm very rusty now. It might not even be 4, but I know some of them are that the jiva, one of the inherent natures of the Atma is that it desires identity. It creates identity. That's why the first element, when all the jivas get shot into the material world, the first element that gets created is ahankar. It's one of the inherent natures of the Atma to create identity, okay? The other one is just to have desire itself. Yeah, and I'll need to double check to get the other ones. There's a list given by our acharyas of things that are inherently qualities of the soul. Sometimes we carry a more impersonalist understanding of the soul. Obviously, another one is consciousness. It's self-effulgent consciousness.
Prabhu, I'm just trying to correlate the desire with the, for example, I'm just taking, just from my experience, what I am, and this is where again, I'm maybe missing the fundamentals. When I see my desires are all related to the indriyas that I have. Indriyas that I have. I don't have any desire, or at least I don't know, maybe I do, but I don't know any desire, which is, everything is related to what I can see, what I can touch, what I can hear, and so on. I can't think of any desire outside that. So if I take the indriya away from me, like I like Krishna because I want to see him. I want to hear because I have ears, the indri through I can express. And same goes with, the prasadam that I can eat and taste, If I take my indris away, in this body that we have, like what kind of desire are there still subtle desires which are there, which are above or beyond the indriyas?
Okay, so desire exists in the soul, but right now you're expressing them through your material indriyas. There are spiritual indriyas as well. The spiritual world is not devoid of indriyas. Okay, so what you're doing now is you're spiritualizing your gyanendriyas and your karmendriyas, right? Are you familiar with this distinction? The gyanendriyas are the indriyas you learn with, and the karmendriyas are the ones you express with, right? So right now you're spiritualizing them. So you're taking a material one and you're spiritualizing it. And then later on, you'll get in your spiritual form, you'll get like fully spiritual ones, and they're made from the same substance as your Atma, okay? So indriyas are always present. You will always need them. But indriyas are the vessel for expressing inherent desire, which exists in those Atma, okay? So they're the ways by which they can be expressed. They're the ways by which they come out. Indriyas are the mechanism. They're like the lenses, right? So if you think of the Atma as like a light of consciousness, the various material senses you put on are like colored lenses or something, which color the way that comes out, right? And Krishna consciousness is about taking the lenses away. But you do still always have indriyas. And so what is Krishna consciousness? Krishna consciousness is about taking your material indriyas and spiritualizing them so that they act as spiritual indriyas. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'll probably have to learn a lot more to get it.
Yeah, it's a little bit complex because we carry a lot of baggage of this idea of the Atma being like this dead thing that's just being taken on for a ride. But that's not the Bhagavad-gītā perspective on the Atma, at least, right? The Atma is something dynamic.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why we have the 3 doers. You couldn't have the 3 doers because remember we were discussing the triangle of the 3 doers, right? The 3 people who are doing things: Supreme Personality of Godhead, matter, and the jiva, right? It would just be matter and the Supreme Personality of Godhead if the jiva didn't have desire in of itself.
Yeah.
Okay. Something to reflect on. So I'll see you next week then. Yeah, and yeah, go enjoy the homework. And also, I mean, it's only a few of us left, but I will. I've nearly finished marking. I just had an exam this week, so I haven't been able to do my second go through. But you will get your marks soon. You will get your marks before I give the next set of questions, so you can get feedback. Okay then, Hare Krishna. I'll see you all next week.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhyev cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.